Hi, my name is Tyler Mowry, and this is the Writer's Mind Podcast, episode 18. All right, welcome Patreon members to another episode. Today, what I want to talk about is cynicism and my hatred of cynicism. So, I used to be a pretty cynical person back in high school and especially in college. I really took a cynical outlook on life, which I think happens to a lot of people around that age, where especially in college, for the first time, I started feeling like I was gaining some level of agency on what I was doing, what I was working on. And in that, I really started to develop this cynicism. And it was in this cynicism where I think a lot of people that age, kind of around 20, they believe that being cynical is similar to being intelligent, that because they can be critical, because they can tear things down, that means that they are smarter than the people around them. And this is something that I had to get out of over time and had to realize that it was not a actually beneficial way to conduct myself, because what cynicism did is it allowed me to sit on a pedestal of being smart without actually doing any work. And I think that's a dangerous place to be. And I think that there is a lot of value in believing you're intelligent, but then having to go out and kind of prove that to yourself in the sense of, creating value for other people, and actually building something so that you have, something to back up your ideas. And, I think that cynicism and criticism, this staying in that state of mind is not good for you. Now, what I do think is, criticism as a concept is very beneficial and useful. However, being a critical person is different than having constructive criticism on an idea, or being critical in the sense of trying to fix and improve your own work or helping somebody improve their work. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is just being critical, right? The general mentality of being a critical person, of every time there's an idea, every time there's something new, every time you come across a system, the first thing that you do is poke all sorts of holes in that. Now, what I do think it is I think a lot of times being critical is a stepping stone to what is the next step, which is, okay, a lot of things don't work correctly. A lot of things are clearly broken. There are a lot of systems that need fixing. And now it is your job to find the systems that you are passionate about, the things that you're passionate about, and make it your mission to improve those things, right? So for me, I was very cynical about the film school that I was in. I was very cynical about where my career was supposed to go as a screenwriter. I was very cynical about what my life was supposed to look like post-college. And so I spent some time kind of wallowing in that cynicism. And then what helped me was I realized that this was not actually a great long-term plan, and that it actually made a lot more sense for me to begin to build what I wanted to do and to begin to take agency and ownership over my life and over what I was going to do. And I think that helped me realize, okay, if there are these things that are broken, if there are these things that aren't working, and I can see that, then why don't I do some work to help that and make it better? There is a angel investor and named Naval Ravikant, and he talks a lot about philosophy, life philosophy. He has a podcast called Naval, and the episodes are very, very short, like 3-minute episodes. He kind of comes in, gives you a specific concept, and then kind of sends you on your way. And I think it's really interesting. I think overall, the whole podcast is only like a couple hours or something, but it's really good. And in that, one of the big elements of his worldview is this idea of optimistic contrarianism. And he says, cynicism is easy, mimicry is easy, but optimistic contrarians are the rarest breed. So he really believes in this idea of not being cynical, but being aware of the problems, in a particular career field or society or even on a worldview level, but then being optimistic in the sense of, oh, these things can be improved, and I can actually be a part of the solution to improve these different things. And that's kind of where the optimism comes in. There's an optimism in your belief in your own agency, both for your own life and for the impact of others around you. And so that Naval was actually really impactful for me. I found him when I was in college, and he has a lot of good ideas he really speaks to people that were where I was, where he really is talking about, yeah, things don't always work. There's a lot of things that aren't perfect, but your agency, your ability to understand what's not working, and then the action that you can actually take in the world to go ahead and fix those things is what is going to matter. It's not you sitting on the sidelines and being upset about a given idea. It's you going out there and having this idea of, hey, I can change things and things can get better. And I think that is where you want to sit. This idea of optimistic contrarianism. Sure, things might be incorrect. You might have a completely different viewpoint from the major cultural view of the people around you. However, because you see it, that means that others can, and that means that you can change things, and that means that you can improve things. And so I really liked that positioning, the positioning of the optimistic contrarian. Now, there's a big element to the optimistic contrarian, and that is action. So, cynicism and critics, a lot of this comes from not doing anything, right? Critics are the ones that are not making the art or not making the business or not making the political system. They are the ones saying, oh, well, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work. And so one big element of the optimistic contrarian is combining this with a topic I talked about previously, which was high agency. If you can become an optimistic, contrarian, high agency person and actually truly get into that zone, then I really think it's like impossible for you to lose. It's impossible for you to not get the things that you want because you're in such a correct frame of mind to make things happen. And what I see a lot, which is really interesting, especially in artistic fields and especially in screenwriting and storytelling, is you have a lot of people that are walking around that wear being an overthinker as like a badge of honor. They're like, I'm an overthinker. You'll see this in like Instagram bios and Twitter bios, and people will say, contrarian overthinker, or they'll say, I just think too much, and this is not a badge of honor. And also, you shouldn't walk around saying that you're an overthinker because everybody thinks that they think too much. Everybody thinks that they are overanalyzing particular problems. That is just kind of part of human nature. So to make part of your identity, that is just kind of a weird thing to do. Now, what you should do is say, okay, well, these are the thoughts that I have. This is what I'm confused about. This is what I don't understand. So why don't I take action into the world? I push myself into the world so that we can start figuring things out. Because if all you do is think and think and think and think, you're not making any progress because nothing is changing, right? And even the simple action of writing out your ideas and your thoughts, and just writing them and writing them and writing them, that is action in and of itself because it's helping you organize what you think. The problem with our thoughts is that they are a mess. This is one of the reasons that writers get so frustrated when they go to write something, because they think they have this brilliant idea in their head and then they go to write it and it's not working. And the reason it's not working is because the ideas that are in your head are a jumbled mess and they are not detailed and they're fuzzy and you think they're perfect and they're not. And then when you actually sit down and force them out of your head and onto a page, you realize just how jumbled and unclear those ideas are. And so it's important to go through that process because you're not an overthinker, you're just not doing any work. And what's good is that you actually begin to make progress both in your thoughts and in your overall worldview once you start taking action. And what's good is you can begin to see like external confirmations of your particular worldview once you're actually taking action. So for example, for me, taking this opinion of an optimistic contrarian, taking this opinion of, like a lot of film schools are not teaching in the right way. They are inefficient. They are confusing. They aren't teaching core storytelling concepts. We have all these professors that don't seem to have a good grasp on storytelling, and that was deeply frustrating to me, and I was cynical about that. And so rather than staying in that space of being cynical and frustrated, I decided to use my YouTube channel to talk about some of the things that I had learned and some of the things that as I was writing, I was realizing, like there's ways to practically look at certain things where I can give myself mental models that I can actually use to help problem solve once I'm actually sitting in front of a screenplay and trying to write. And that was what I felt was a problem, was that in all these classes that I was in, we were learning theory that wasn't applicable, right? And so that was so frustrating to me because it was like, okay, I understand what you're saying, conflict and characters and all these things, but like, how do I use them when I'm sitting in front of a screenplay? And so I started building my YouTube channel focusing on that. Like, okay, here's what helped me get to the end of a story and figure out some of these big things. You know, the Harmon Story Circle, I preach about it constantly because it was so helpful for me to realize where momentum problems were in my story. And understanding philosophical conflict in these different ideas, and they were very practical and they were just clear and focused, and they helped me write. And so that's why then Practical Screenwriting became my website, because it was about becoming practical about storytelling. And so what if I had stayed in this mental zone of cynicism and being critical rather than actually saying, no, you know what, I think I've learned some things and I can share this with other people? Then my YouTube channel would have gone nowhere. My website would not exist. This podcast would not exist. I would likely be doing projects and working on things that I wasn't happy with. And it's so interesting because there's this feedback loop where my knowledge of storytelling has dramatically increased because I have been helping other people and looking at specific problems that people have had. And then suddenly me pushing my ideas out to the world creates this feedback loop where people say, okay, what about this? And I'm like, oh, these are interesting. Let me think about these problems. And then let me see what the errors in my own thinking are because of these problems. Do these problems fit with the ideas that I've put out? And then you get this positive feedback loop. And then you can take it even more meta than that, and you can realize that this positive feedback loop is created because I decided to take an optimistic contrarian position in my mind. That I decided to say, okay, you know what, things aren't working, but rather than sitting around and being upset about that, I'm going to do what I can to fix the problem as much as I can. And then that not only helped other people see storytelling concepts more clearly, it helped me see storytelling concepts more clearly, and it helped me realize that actually this worldview, this optimistic contrarian worldview, was a good place for my mind to be in. Because when I took action, I was realizing that I was getting feedback that was proving this idea correct. And that is what was important. Proving this idea correct by taking action. There's a quote by Marcel Duchamp. Marcel Duchamp he was a artist of many different fields. He was a painter and he was a writer and he did a lot of different things. And Marcel Duchamp said, "Not everyone is an artist, but everyone is an effing critic." It's so easy to be the person who is critical. What is difficult is being the person who decides, okay, I'm going to take action and make a change in the thing that I want to be fixed, right? And this applies not just to writing and not just to business, and this can get very specific. If you have problems with your family or friends, you are the one that is going to say, okay, well, here are the problems. How can I actually adjust this? Not by being critical of the people around me, but by changing my actions to then influence the world around me. There is a famous quote. You may have heard this quote, but it's from Theodore Roosevelt, who was an American president, if you don't know about him. And he says, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat." You might fail in the thing that you are trying to do. That might be screenwriting, that might be storytelling, that might be whatever you're trying to build. That might be building an audience around your storytelling. You might fail in that. It might not work out. But what is good is you realizing that you have agency and you get to make the decision on what you will do and what you will try to achieve. And that is, I think, the way to live. The way to live is by taking action and trying to figure it out. And I think that as storytellers, we get to share that with other people through telling stories. And what's so fascinating about this is that when you realize that, okay, taking action to figure out what we believe and how life should be lived is how stories work, right? Because in a story, characters are taking external action towards what they want, based upon their internal beliefs. And that is what you are doing as a writer and as a person who is trying to be an optimistic contrarian, somebody who is trying to develop their own ideas, even if those are different from the ideas that are around them. Somebody who is trying to share ideas that they believe will benefit others and fix some of the problems that we see in the world around us. And so what's so interesting about learning some of these ideas is how it makes writing stories more clear for you. And this is so interesting because so many writers, when I talked earlier in this podcast about how there's a lot of writers who talk about that, how they're overthinkers. They're overthinkers because they're overthinkers, and then their writing is not any good because they aren't taking any life action. They are writing stories about thinking. They're writing stories about characters in their own heads. They're writing stories about characters who don't take action because it's not natural to them. It's not organic to them because they are not doing it in their own life, and so they're not seeing their characters as doing it because they aren't doing it. I talked in the podcast right before this one about the adventurer writer, the person who's out there taking the action, trying to figure things out. That's what your character should also be doing. And you can't understand that, and you can't organically write if all you're doing is quote unquote overthinking. And that is so important to realize because, when I work with people one-on-one, when I talk with people in the practical screenwriting course, a lot of the time they are struggling with this relationship between character action and character beliefs. How do you create character action specifically based upon the beliefs of that character? It's like, well, if you're doing that in your own life, it's easier for that to click in your mind and you to make that connection. So, what I want from you as somebody who is following this podcast, who is inside the Patreon, I want you to think about whether or not you are a cynical overthinker or whether you are an optimistic contrarian. Are you taking the action in your life to figure out what the best way to live is and how to share that with other people through storytelling? Are you doing that consistently, or are you going through the motions of a day-to-day, pushing down some of these thoughts, calling yourself an overthinker, and hoping for the best? So that's what I want to leave you with today, and I will see you next week.